It's like the beginning of the world told with an ostrich egg. This is an ostrich feather fan and an octopus. I'm being the octopus tonight. Good evening and welcome to my bibliotherapy live session this evening. It's actually really cold, but I'm pretending it's hot with my lovely ostrich feather fan, which I've brought in to this session because I'm going to be talking all about creation myths. And creation myths must surely involve eggs, ostriches, maybe, and possibly octopuses. Here is my octopus, which is a magnificent creature, as I'm sure you will agree. Thank you to Suze, who gave me this amazing beast as a birthday present this year. I deeply love it. There's many things that got me going down this route of thinking about creation myths. In my art classes, which I teach here in Hurstpierpoint, my theme this term is elemental. And I was thinking about the elements, I was thinking about earth, I was thinking about the beginning of the world, and I started looking at earth in various ways. And I came across this amazing image, which I hope you'll be able to see, which you might not immediately know what it is before you look closely. It's a turtle with the world on its back. And that is something that really did happen. It's a turtle that was hibernating for several months, and it was in a place in California, I believe, where scientists had been monitoring these turtles who hibernate for months on end, and they suddenly decide to come up at the right moment, and it's all connected with how they pass gas and how they know when to come to the earth. I don't understand it at all. But look at this poor turtle with the earth on its back. And this got me thinking about the metaphorical turtle that holds up the world and has the earth on his back, which is one of the creation myths from India. And it's also in Terry Pratchett's Discworld, which we'll be talking about in a minute. Here we have a turtle with elephants on his back holding up the world, just like this fabulous turtle here, which only emerged in recent months. And I think people might have seen this picture all over Twitter. You can look it up if you look up hibernating turtle emerging from the earth. You'll find it. Isn't it incredible? And that made me think about how the earth in some cultures was held up by a turtle. And then furthermore, it had elephants on its back too. So I was thinking about creation myths, and I started looking at them through various methods. And I've also brought in lots of props tonight because I do love a visual aid. Look at this. This surely could be the beginning of the world as well. This is actually something that came from my mum and dad's house. It's very, very heavy. It's solid glass, but it's full of bubbles. And it has an interesting quirk, which is that, hi Ben, good to see you here. This has this quirk that if you leave it in the sunlight is refracted through the bubbles, and it has actually been known to cause burns in the floor. It famously caused a permanent burn in my parents' wooden floor in Suffolk. And so it's actually comes with a health warning. But look, doesn't it really look like the earth, the whole of nature, the whole of the world could spring from that orb, just like it could spring from this amazing egg, which could be suspended in space. By the way, my art students did some really fantastic paintings, which you can go and see on my Art Instagram page. Check those out because there's some really great pictures, and one of them is an egg suspended over a landscape. That's by Kate Shanahan, and it really looks as if the world is about to burst forth out of that egg. And in my mind, that picture was also getting connected with Isaac and the Egg, which is an absolutely brilliant novel, which I've been thinking about a lot. It's not a creation myth. It's just a really beautiful, fantastic story. It's by Bobby Palmer. It's actually really about grief and a kind of alien creature who is an egg. But you should read that book. Anyway, that's by the by. So that's how it all began, thinking about these creation myths. And I've been having lots of fun getting ideas together for visual images. And that got me going down the road of creation myths in literature. Now, a lot of creation myths have been handed down orally over the years, over the centuries, and therefore they're not necessarily in books. I think that's an ostrich feather there. Sorry about that. Have to do a bit of fanning. But I'd love to know if you have any thoughts about books that do have creation myths in them, ideally fiction. I will be mentioning some as we go along. I'm going to start off by talking about the Aztec creation story, which is one that we here in the UK don't necessarily get taught when we're in school. Sadly, there's so many more fun creation myths that we could learn about other than the biblical and also ancient Greek and Roman, which is what we tend to be taught, I would say, and maybe Hindu creation myths. But as we go along, do send in comments if you have any favourite creation myths that you'd like to talk about. Anyway, Aztecs. So the story of creation, according to the Aztecs, is actually a story of birth, death, and rebirth. When the world is destroyed, it's born again through the sacrifice of one of the gods, and so through the birth of a new son. So you'll often hear of the legend of the 5 sons, the 5 births of the world. 5 sons, and so 5 different worlds have existed. When the story is told, the order of the worlds is sometimes different. Sometimes there are even less than 5 sons, but the general idea remains the same. You see, this is the thing about creation myths, is that they're always changing. Just got to bring in my octopus again, because I do think it's all about the visuals this evening. And by the way, if you were making up your own creation myth, what would be in it? I did make up my own creation myth for the purposes of my art class, and this was it. It involves an octopus, very much inspired by the octopus that I just showed you with its candles in it, because I think octopuses are amazing and they clearly could be responsible for beginning the world. It also has a crow's beak up there because crows are very important in creation myths, and I think you will discover that as we go along this evening. Crows or ravens have often been responsible for stealing the sun and thus putting it in its right place so that humanity can benefit from the sun. And then at the bottom, I originally was going to have a lotus flower because there's many a lotus flower in a creation myth, but I happen to really love hibiscuses because I used to live in Trinidad and there were many amazing hibisci in Trinidad. And I feel like they're a great symbol of creation because they have this wonderful thrusting phallic ejaculation, and they're also incredible colours. And you could very much imagine the world beginning from a hibiscus. So that was my version of a creation myth. And by the way, just for the arty types among you, you can see there that I did these lovely dots using a tracing wheel. That's something that I'm going to come back to on my art channel. Anyway, another time. So back to the Aztecs. In the beginning was the void. It was at some ancient time in Aztec creation history that the dual god Ometecui, sorry about the pronunciation, created itself. I think it's Ometecatetl. Sorry about that, can't quite get that right. This god was good and bad. He was a dual god, chaos and order, male and female, um, gender fluid. Being male and female, it was able to have children. It had four, which came to represent the four directions of north, south, east, and west. The gods were Huitzilopochtli, south, Quetzalcoatl, east, Tezcatlipoca, west, and Zyptotec, north. I wonder why Quetzalcoatl is the one that we've heard of. That's the one I've heard of, anyway. The directions were very important to the Aztecs since their great empire was believed to be the very center of the universe. These four gods began to create. They created water and other gods and the sea monster, Kipactli. Kipactli was part fish and part crocodile, a massive creature as big as all things that now are. This was a consuming monster, a jaw at every point. Kipactli was to become the source of the cosmos in a strange way. As the gods continued to create, they had a problem. Their creations would fall into the water and be eaten by the dreadful Kipactli. So it was time for war. The four gods attacked the sea monster, pulling her in four directions. She fought back, biting Tezcatlipoca and tearing off his foot, but at last Kipactli was destroyed. From this enormous creature, the universe was created. In some traditions, this happened between the last two suns. So the suns seem to be quite fluid in where they come in the story. All the 13 heavens stretch into her head. The earth was created in the middle, and her tail reaches down to the underworld, Mictlan, and there were 9 underworlds to be exact. You could say that in the Aztec creation story, the world is on the back of this sea monster, floating in the water of space, reminiscent of the Iroquois belief that the world rests on the back of a turtle, which we were talking about earlier. So that turtle comes back into its own. It's a very important turtle, relating also to this one. So that is the Aztec creation, and there's a bit more to be told. To complete this world, the great source of energy had to be created, the sun. This is the key to the cycles of the Aztec creation story. But the sun is so powerful it can't just be created. It can only come into being through the sacrifice of a god. The god chosen was Tezcatlipoca. It's pretty brutal, this world of the Aztec creation stories and the suns. Tezcatlipoca only managed to become half a sun, however, making this first creation incomplete. During the first age, the gods created giants from ashes and gave them acorns to eat. A fight began, however, between Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca. In the end, the sun was knocked from the sky, and in anger, Tezcatlipoca sent jaguars to destroy the giants. This is where the second sun comes in. At this point, Quetzalcoatl took over for his brother as the sun. Humans were created as they are now, in our humans' eyes. They lived on pinon nuts, and for a while things were fine. But the people became corrupt, and perhaps out of revenge, Tezcatlipoca turned them into monkeys. Furious, Quetzalcoatl sent a hurricane to blow the monkeys away. Actually, that's another thing, that monkeys are quite important in many a creation myth, and many is the time that I think about the stone monkey in Journey to the West by Wu Cheng En, in which a monkey burst out of a stone, and he was a kind of god of chaos and naughtiness in a way. Where was I? Tialok was one of the early creations of the gods, the god of rain and water. He became the next sun, but his personal problems became his downfall. Once again, Tezcatlipoca was the instigator. Tezcatlipoca stole Tialok's wife, and Tialok was grief-stricken. He shone as the sun, but refused to send rain in spite of the pleas of the people. Drought swept the earth, and finally, in a rage, Tialok made it rain fire, burning away this version of the world. Another version attributes the destruction of this world directly to the continuing battle between Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl. There's many a different variation here. I'll speed up a bit through this Aztec one because it's all getting quite complicated. The Aztec creation story continues. This time, the god selected Tialoc's sister to be the sun. She was Calchuitlicu. Sorry about my pronunciation, it's quite bad. But filled with jealousy, Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl struck down the sun. As she fell, the sky opened up and water flooded the earth. All things were destroyed again. It's a constant battle of creation and destruction in this Aztec myth. In the darkness between the suns, Quetzalcoatl descended into the underworld to bring up the bones of the dead. They would be used to bring life to people who are now here. And that's a whole other story. Oh my God. The gods gathered to bring another sun into being. This is when the Aztec creation story gets really around to beginning to explain what the world is like today. The proud god, Tecutzelcatl, offered himself, but the other gods preferred the humble Nanahuatzin. A great fire was built, but Tecutzelcatl was too afraid at the last minute to jump in. Nanahuatzin did jump. Filled with jealousy, Tecutzelcatl jumped after, followed by a brave eagle and jaguar. Two suns began to rise in the east. It was too bright. The gods threw a rabbit into the face of Tecutzelcatl to dim the light, and he became the moon. So the moon was originally a rabbit. But Nanahuatzin was weak. He was motionless, so the other gods gave their blood to give him the energy to rush across the sky. This is the world in which we now live. The Aztecs believed its end would come in massive earthquakes. So, that is the Aztec myths, which are pretty fascinating, and they're very much about creation and destruction. I'm just going to have to strip because it's actually getting really hot. Started off cold, but now getting quite hot with all this animated telling of the creation myths and lifting heavy objects like this, which could be the world. It's quite interesting how it's reflecting my laptop in it, which slightly ruins the image of it being the beginning of the world, but it is rather an amazingly marvellous orb, is it not? So I'd love to know if you do have any favourite creation myths, or maybe you were brought up with Adam and Eve. There aren't actually that many novels which have creation myths in them, but do tell me if you can think of any. I'm going to be coming on to some of my favourites, which are Cosmic Comics by Italo Calvino, a bit later, which is short stories, a bit like Just So Stories by Rudyard Kipling. So now we're going to talk about the Greek creation myths. And by the way, just to say, I'm not an expert on any of these myths, so don't take me as being absolutely the last word in these, but this is just what I've gleaned through research and stories that I've read in childhood and up to now. But what I love about creation myths is that they change all the time because they are orally passed down. And that's what makes them all the more fun, because you can actually change them yourself to fit your own beliefs and to fit the way you might want to explain the world. So now we're going back to the Greek origin stories. In the beginning, there was only chaos, an empty void, but somehow this enormous vacancy gave birth to Gaia, the earth, to Tartarus, the great region beneath the earth, and to Eros, the shining god of love and attraction. Chaos also bore Erebus, the darkness of the netherworld, and night, the darkness over the earth. Then Erebus slept with night, who gave birth to ether, the heavenly light, and to day, the earthly light. Later, night alone produced such beings as doom, fate, death, sleep, dreams, nemesis, and a long list of other atrocities that steal upon us in the darkness. So that's pretty interesting. Night alone produced doom, fate, death, sleep, dreams, a nemesis, and many more atrocities. Meanwhile, Gaia, without help, gave birth to Uranus, the starry sky, to the mountains, and to Pontus, the sterile sea. Uranus then became Gaia's mate and equal, for he covered her on all sides. This primordial couple, sky and earth, produced the 12 Titans, the 3 towering wheel-eyed Cyclops, and the 3 terrible Hecatoncheires, with 50 heads and 100 arms apiece. Ben, I wonder if you have any creation myths that go back to your youth. Did you used to talk about them back at the Friends School? I bet you did. And I wonder which ones they were. Let me know. However, Uranus proved to be a harsh husband and father. Each of the Hecatoncheires hated him, and he hated them in return. In his anger, Uranus pushed them back into Gaia's womb and kept them there. Gaia writhed in pain at this and plotted revenge upon her mate. She fashioned a flint sickle and called upon her other children to avenge her. This could be the flint sickle, even though it's not really sickle shaped, but it could be a weapon. The Titans and Cyclops recoiled in fear of their father, and only the last-born Titan, Cronus, was daring enough to fight back. That night, when Uranus came to lie without Gaia, the crafty Cronus was hiding in ambush. He grabbed his father's genitals and severed them with his mother's sickle. It's all quite gruesome. As the blood fell to earth, the Furies who punish crimes, the ash tree nymphs, and the race of giants were created. Cronus heaved the members into the sea, and from the foam arose Aphrodite, the beautiful goddess of love, arising from the sea, as we've seen in many a painting. Where are we? The mutilated Uranus either withdrew forever from the earth or else he perished. But before he did so, he promised that Cronus and the other Titans would be punished. After confining the Cyclops and the Hecatoncheires to Tartarus, Cronus established his reign. He married his sister, Rhea. There's quite a lot of incest in these Greek myths, let's face it. And under his lordship, the Titans produced many offspring. Yet Cronus could not allow his own children to survive, for both Gaia and Uranus had prophesied that Cronus would be supplanted by a son. When Rhea, his wife, gave birth to the gods and goddesses, Cronus swallowed Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon shortly after each was born. Rhea was furious and took pains to save her 6th child, Zeus, from his father. She bore Zeus in secret and then gave Cronus a stone wrapped in swaddling bands to swallow instead. A stone wrapped in swaddling bands. That's a good ruse, isn't it? And actually, I do have a prop, perhaps, to represent that. I've brought in quite a few egg-like things this evening. This could be a stone wrapped in swaddling bands to take the place of a baby. But maybe the good old orb is what we need, because that tonight for me is representing creation. And that could also be a stone wrapped in swaddling bands. Attended by nymphs, Zeus grew to manhood on Crete. Cronus, meanwhile, was growing old. So Zeus sought advice on how to defeat him from the Titaness Metis, who prepared an emetic potion. Disguised as a cup-bearer, Zeus gave this potion to Cronus, who vomited up Zeus's brothers and sisters. That's rather clever, isn't it? As well as the stone Rhea had given him. The gods were alive and unhurt, and together with Zeus they triumphed over Cronus and bound him in Tartarus. Zeus then set up the stone at Parnassus, a monument to his victory over the Titan king. Zeus's triumph, however, was far from secure. The other Titans, with the exception of Prometheus and Oceanus, rebelled against these upstart gods. For 10 years, the fighting lasted, a cosmos-shaking battle in which the elements of nature raged without check. Neither the gods nor the Titans could secure a decisive victory. But then Zeus went down to Tartarus and released the Cyclops and the 100-handed monsters. The Cyclops awarded Zeus their weapons of thunder and lightning, and the Hecatoncheires pelted the Titans with boulders, and at last the Titans were defeated. Zeus imprisoned them in Tartarus, and he condemned the rebel Atlas to stand forever at the edge of the world and bear the heavens on his shoulders. Gaia was enraged at the downfall of her children, the Titans, and through her union with Tartarus, she gave birth to one last monster, Typhoeus, a dragon with 100 heads that never rested. Terrified, most of the gods fled, but Zeus was captured and confined. Released by Hermes, Zeus finally destroyed the dragon by hurling lightning at it again and again, and by burying it under Etna in Sicily. We can just have a representation of the dragon here. It's not a dragon, it's an octopus, but I feel this octopus needs to make a lot of appearances tonight because it really could have been an octopus that was responsible for creating the world, because octopuses are amazing and fascinating and highly intelligent. So surely they could be gods. And I know there's a book with an octopus god. Oh yes. There's a book which, Laughing John, are you there tonight? Laughing John, you gave me a book which was all about an octopus that spoke to a man, and it was inside his head, and he was an octopus god. And it's going to come back to me. It might even be called Octopus Man. I'm just trying to find it because, yes, it is called The Octopus Man. It's by Jasper Gibson, and it's an absolutely brilliant book, and it does have this rather sinister octopus god inside a man's head. It's kind of a story about mental health more than it is about a creation myth, but I highly recommend it. The Octopus Man, great story. Had forgotten about that for a minute. Not a creation myth, but one with an amazing octopus who could have created the world. There was one more attempt to dislodge Zeus and the other Olympians from their mastery of the world. The giants, who had sprouted from Uranus's blood, were dissatisfied, so they laid siege to Olympus by piling mountain upon mountain in an attempt to scale it. It required all the prowess of the gods and the assistance of the mortal Heracles to subdue and kill the giants. Having vanquished the Titans, the dragon Typhoeus, and the giants, the rule of the Olympians was undisputed. This version of the creation was taken largely from Hesiod, who was a Greek poet, as I'm sure you all know, of the 7th century BC. So that was a very quick summary of the Greek creation myth. And it really is a pretty violent and unpleasant story, with the cutting off of testicles by a sickle, which is quite a horrible idea. So now I'm going to move on to ravens in mythology. Here is a rather beautiful raven. It's not one of my art students' creations, but it is one that inspired some very beautiful paintings, which you should definitely check out on my Elabertu Paintings Instagram page, where you can see pictures by my fabulous art students who were doing creation myths this week. So do have a look at that. And they were inspired by the fact that there's often ravens and crows in creation myths who do amazing and important things. And I'm just going to read you a little bit about the raven in Native American mythology. The raven is a very important figure in most Native American cultures. It's seen as the creator of light and a trickster figure. Native American culture is embedded with extensive tales and legends. Every aspect of life and death and existence has its own story to explain why things are the way they are. Often different Native American tribes have very similar beliefs, but most tribes have their own unique variations. And this is true of many cultures, and that's also why creation myths are often so variable and complex. Although credited as the creator of life, one story of the raven depicts a greedy and mischievous figure who mostly works for selfish reasons, while at the same time teaching lessons about life. The Native American tribes recognized that raven was the key, which opened many of life's treasures to them, and for this they were grateful. They also realized that raven didn't do this for the good of man or anything else, but only for himself or herself. So although Native Americans are thankful for what the raven has given them, they realize that the raven is not to be trusted and is more selfish than generous. So there are many, many variations of the raven story, but I'm going to give you one that I found from a professor called Judson Moore. The name of Raven is Kitkar. Raven was instructed from birth by his father in every subject so that the raven could make a world. After trying many different ways, he was finally successful. The raven started by creating light. Raven had heard that a wealthy man was living on top of a hill, and he had a light, but he didn't let it out for the world to see. Raven tried many ways to get into the house to obtain the light, and finally devised a plan that would work. Raven transformed himself into a speck of dirt and placed himself in a glass of water from which the man's daughter was drinking. The girl drank the speck of dirt and in this way became pregnant. These trickster ravens, he sounds as bad as Zeus. He was always doing that kind of thing, getting girls pregnant by turning himself into either light or bits of dirt, similar to the raven in this story. Sometime later, a child was born, and Raven possessed this child. When Raven had the strength to crawl around the house, he found the shelf where the man had his treasures on display. Raven cried intensely for the objects on the shelf. In the form of a baby, you see, he was crying. And eventually the man pulled down his bag of stars and allowed the child to play with it. Raven rolled the stars around on the ground for a while, and then, when he saw an opportunity, let them go up the smoke hole, where they scattered into the sky, in the arrangement which you see them in today. So there the raven is cleverly letting the stars go out into the sky by pretending to be a baby. Quite an amazing story. The next day, the boy cried, so the boy in the form of the raven, cried for more of the things on the shelf and was given a bag that contained the moon. Raven played with the moon, and in the same fashion as the stars, he let the moon up the smoke hole, and it went into the sky for all to see. And here I'll just give a little representation of the moon because we love this amazing orb. This could be the moon going up into the sky, let forth by the clever old raven. On the third day, the boy, in the form of the raven, cried very intensely for the final object on the shelf, and the man, knowing what would happen, but unable to refuse his grandson, gave him the box that contained the sun. As soon as Raven had this, he flew up the smoke hole with the box, having stolen all the man's valuables. Raven did not yet release the sun. Raven shortly thereafter was told of a well with a never-ending supply of water. Raven went to the place where the well was and learned that the man who owned the well kept it covered and never left its side. He even built his house around the well and slept by it so that no one else could drink from it. What a selfish man! Once again, Raven began to scheme a plan to get his water. Raven disguised himself as the man's brother-in-law and went to the man, telling him he would stay the night with him. Raven really is a terrible trickster and obviously very good at disguise. Raven went to the place where the well was and learned... I just had that bit. Sorry about that. Raven disguised himself as the man's brother-in-law, went to the man, telling him to stay the night with him. Both went to sleep, and in the early morning Raven woke up and went away from the well. When Raven returned, he brought with him dog dung and put it on the sleeping man's buttocks. Raven awoke the man and showed the man the accident he'd had in the night. The man was embarrassed and in need of cleaning up, and he ran out of his house to clean himself. Very clever. By the time the man came back, Raven had drunk up nearly all the water. Raven flew out the smoke hole away from the man, but got stuck. The man commenced with making a fire under Raven to make smoke, and this smoke turned the raven the colour we are accustomed to seeing it today. Previously, the raven had been pure white, so Raven was turned black because of the soot from the fire. Raven finally escaped and flew out over the land, spitting water here and there, creating the great rivers of the world. So that is how the rivers were created. Amy, good to see you this evening. We should talk more about these creation stories. Raven finally escaped, flew out over the land, created the rivers. Whenever small drops of water leaked from his beak, they formed the small creeks. When Raven happened upon a village where many beings lived, he was asked if he came from the house where the sun was kept. Raven pulled out the box and opened it just enough to let out a little bit of light, as he was proud of his accomplishment. The people were thrown back by the bright light and then began to fight with Raven to get the box. Raven was unnerved by this behaviour, so he opened the box all the way and the sun shot up into the sky. This village's beings were then transformed into the animals whose skin they were wearing and ran off into the forest and the oceans. That's kind of quite a mad thought, because if they're wearing skins of animals, surely those skins already existed. But let's not be too picky about this creation myth, because they are all slightly crazy and unpredictable. In this manner, the sun was brought into the world and the forests and oceans were populated with game. Raven is credited for many other gifts and curses to man, but the creation of the stars, moons, rivers, and sun were the most essential and universally believed myths among North American Indians. And here is that naughty raven stealing the sun, which is not a picture by me or any of my art students, but one that inspired us. Look at that amazing sun. But do check out the amazing pictures by my fabulous art students on my Ella Bear 2 Paintings Instagram page. Thanks, Laughing John, for the wig comment. I've just been talking about the Octopus Man before you came on, which you recommended to me and which was brilliant, because I was referring to the amazingness of octopuses. And here I have a simply marvellous octopus, which was given to me by the gorgeous Susan Elderkin, my co-writer of the novel Cure. And it was partly because of that wonderful octopus candle that I went down the route of thinking about an octopus being the original creator of the world. And this is my rendition of a creation myth with the octopus, the crow's beak, which is in a way stealing the sun, because the octopus could also be the sun. And here we have a hibiscus flower, which is ejaculating creativity into the universe. So that was all about the North American beliefs of the raven and how important the raven was to the beginning of the world. And now I'm going to give you a few other interesting creation myths from many different cultures. Here we have Bushongo mythology. This is from the Bushongo people of the Congo. Apparently, this is quite a recent creation myth, by the way. They believed, the Bushongo people of the Congo, that a god called Bumba once existed in darkness, then one day fell ill and vomited the sun, moon, and stars into existence. There's quite a lot of vomiting things into existence that goes on in these creation myths. But I guess why not? It's a valid way to create something new, some would say. However, Bumba still felt pain, and to relieve himself, he released 9 creatures, one of which was Tsetse, a possible reference to lightning and a particular mischievous troublemaker that would leap down to strike the earth. Each of these 9 creatures then created all the world's animals, with humans being the last of them. Bumba showed humans how to use fire, and he who said to the people, "Behold these wonders, they belong to you." Hold your horses. Just coming on to my next page. What makes it a more recent creation story is that colonialism seemed to have had an impact, as Bumba was said to represent a giant white man. The idea isn't so far-fetched, as 40% of African slaves started their journey from the Congo and Angola coasts. So that's an interesting thought. Can that really be such a recent creation myth? I don't know the full origins of that origin story, but it's a very interesting thought. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Mayan mythology, where people were made from corn, and this is a rather favourite creation myth of mine. Corn was a staple food for Mayan people, so it's no surprise that in a world where corn was believed to be the only food source, it became part of the creation story. In one legend, the deities, including the feathered serpent, had failed to create human beings with hearts and minds. Finally, they managed to create humans out of yellow and white corn, who could talk and were left to roam the earth. That's because they first tried to create humans out of clay, and that succeeded in creating their form, but it didn't succeed in giving them minds and hearts. So then, I think first they tried soil, then they tried clay, and then they tried corn, and it was corn that actually worked. In another story, the lords of Xibalba, the Mayan underworld, summoned the hero twins called Hunahpu and Zixplananque to play a ball game in their own court. It's a fantastical story of trickery and deceit, death and reincarnation, and showed that the gods also had human traits. After the hero twins had defeated the lords of Xibalba, they ascended to the heavens, becoming the sun and the moon. The twins then planted corn for humans to live on Earth, giving rise to a new age. If the Mayans had discovered other food staples like bread or rice, maybe their creation myth might have involved them. There's some really fabulous pictures to be found on the web of corn being made into humans. And one of my favourites is a corn on the cob, a maize bud, what would you call it? Fruit. So with the leaves of the corn on the cob, with a little man inside the bud, which is rather beautiful. And a rather fab idea to think that humans might have once grown in a cornfield. Let's talk a little bit about Norse mythology. So according to Norse mythology, there was a great void called Ginnungagap, with one end being scorching and the other extremely cold. In the middle, however, the ice could be melted. One of the first creatures, Ymir, an ice giant, was formed from melting ice. As he slept, he started to sweat, and under his arms, two other giants were formed, becoming the first of the giants. So giants were formed from the sweat of another giant's armpit. These giants would drink milk from a cow giant called Adhumbla, who was also formed from melting ice. She would lick an ice block until one day a man named Buri emerged, the first of the gods who came out of the ice block. Odin was the grandson of this first god. And I smile at the name Odin because we actually had a dog. Our first dog, who was an Alsatian, was called Odin, named by my mum. And he and his brothers were bothered by the fact that the giants outnumbered them. So one day they plotted to kill Ymir, and after an epic battle which almost wiped out all the giants, Ymir lay dead. From his corpse, the blood became the oceans, rivers, and lakes. The flesh became the land. The bones became the mountains. The teeth were made into rocks. The hair became the grass and the trees. The eyelashes became Midgard. So, where did the first humans come from? According to legend, Odin and his brothers walked along a beach and found two logs. They gave each of the logs spirit, intelligence, and senses, and they became the first humans, Aska and Embla. If humans came as a result of the gods, and the gods came from a giant cow, then it remains that all life originated from the frost giant, Ymir. So we originally came from a frost giant. It's also interesting to note that the Nordic people believed in a flat earth, since the gods used Ymir's skull as a lid to cover the earth. But what parts of the giant were used to create the deserts or the jungles, for example? Of course, the Norse likely never knew that such places existed, so their absence in the creation myth is to be expected. What does this tell us about humans and how we think? I ask you. Maybe it's the fact that our surroundings have always influenced us, and that changing our views of the world only happens if that change affects us. It's very interesting to look back on these creation myths from many years ago, and there's many more which I could be talking about, and I'd love to know if you have particular creation myths that are your favourites and that I've missed. But before we come to an end, I do want to talk about Italo Calvino's Cosmic Comics, which is, in a way, some of my favourite creation myths. They're short stories, which I often describe as being like just so stories for grown ups. Just so stories, you could also say, are creation myths, the stories by Rudyard Kipling, which are fantastic reads, and you should definitely read them if you haven't read them. Try reading them aloud because they're absolutely brilliant to read aloud. And they are about things like how the elephant got his trunk, how the leopard got his spots, the cat who walked by himself, and so on. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those. However, you may not know the Cosmic Comic stories, and these are absolutely brilliant and beautiful tales, and they describe things like the distance of the moon is the first one, and that talks about how the moon gradually left the earth. So in Italo Calvino's story, the moon was once part of the earth, but it breaks away and it's made of cheese. And humans are able to jump from Earth onto the moon. They have a ladder and they climb up the ladder, and gravity pulls them. Once they get close enough to the moon, they get sucked by gravity to the moon. And it's a really beautiful story, which is a love story, but absolutely brilliantly written. And it's kind of a lovely way of thinking about how the moon broke away from the earth at the beginning of time. But then we also have many other stories, such as A Sign in Space, which is all about the way that signs are created in the cosmos. And it's kind of about what is reality, how does something become defined as a thing? It's very metaphysical indeed. And Nikki, as a mathematician, I think you'd really love that story because it actually has a lot of mathematical and physical elements to it. There's also a story called Without Colours, which is about how the world started off as being completely grey, and then suddenly one day colours arrive. And there's a girl and a boy in the story who are there at the beginning of time, and the girl is actually really freaked out by the first colour that appears because she's just used to grey and thinks, why must we have colour? And I love the way it's described with colour arriving. It's very beautiful and inspiring, and I'll just read you a little tiny bit of it to give you an idea of what it's like. You rarely met anyone in those days. There were so few of us. To survive with that ultraviolet, you couldn't be too demanding. Above all, the lack of atmosphere asserted itself in many ways. You take meteors, for example. They fell like hail from all the points of space, because then we didn't have the stratosphere, where nowadays they strike as if on a roof and disintegrate. Then there was the silence. No use shouting. Without any air to vibrate, we were all deaf and dumb. The temperature. There was nothing around to retain the sun's heat. When night fell, it was so cold you could freeze stiff. Fortunately, the Earth's crust warmed us from below, with all those molten minerals which were being compressed in the bowels of the planet. The nights were short, like the days. The Earth turned around faster. I slept huddled up to a very warm rock. The dry cold all around was pleasant. In other words, as far as the climate went, to tell you the truth, I wasn't so badly off. Among the countless indispensable things we had to do without, the absence of colours, as you can imagine, was the least of our problems. Even if we had known they existed, we would have considered them an unsuitable luxury. The only drawback was the strain on your eyes when you had to hunt for something or someone, because with everything equally colourless, no form could be clearly distinguished from what was behind it or around it. You could barely make out a moving object, a meteor fragment as it rolled, or the serpentine yawning of a seismic chasm, or a lapillus being ejected from a volcano. These stories are absolutely amazing, and I was inspired by them to create 6 paintings, which are some of my favourite paintings that I've ever made, which unusually for me were all in brown and white. And the marvellous Heather Westgate has them in her house, and they are indeed all about the beginning of the world and tell the story of the cosmic comics. And you can find them on my website, which will be up very soon. At the moment, I think if you search my website, you won't find anything that helpful. My husband, Carl, is marvellously in the process of bringing that website back up, but there's been some technical glitches, so it's not there yet. I'll just give you a little bit more of a creation myth before we come to an end. But do, if you're able to think of it, let me know of any creation myths that you would love to share with me and which I haven't mentioned. And also, if you know of any creation myths in fiction, that's really what I want to know about. Terry Pratchett obviously must be mentioned because in Discworld, he very brilliantly describes a world which is on the back of a giant turtle. And it's a really fabulous story, which is based on some of the original mythology in which the heavens were supported by 7 elephants, and the 7 elephants were fixed on a tortoise. And this comes from Hindu mythology originally, but it's also to be found in various other mythologies. And there is that idea of turtles going all the way down, which is a way of thinking about infinity. Because if the turtle supports the world, what is supporting the turtle? Is it another turtle? And many a person has postulated that turtles must keep going all the way down, supporting the earth, as in this picture, but then there would be another one under that and another one under that. And it all started with me thinking about the hibernating turtle who is supporting the world on his back. And this is a real turtle that really was hibernating quite recently, because this picture came out on Twitter and on the web when that turtle emerged about 6 weeks ago. And it was being monitored by scientists who were waiting for it to come up. And that particular turtle was quite slow at coming out of its hibernation. So I think on that exciting note, I might end. Though, actually, having said that, I just want to talk a tiny bit about dream time, which is the Aboriginal explanation for the beginning of the world, and that's the Aborigines of Australia. So the dreaming, also referred to as dream time, is a term devised by early anthropologists to refer to a religious cultural worldview attributed to Australian Aboriginal beliefs. It is a word which is quite contentious because it was originally used by a non-Aboriginal academic called Francis Gillen, who was European, and it was then adopted by his colleagues and thereafter became eventually a very common usage of a word to describe the Aboriginal ideas of the beginning of the world. But Aborigines themselves have a different word for it, which is kind of impossible to translate. I'm not an expert, I'm just gleaning all this from what I've read over the years. And we used to live in Australia, and I did quite a lot of research into this idea when I lived there and beyond. And I love Aboriginal art and their representations of the dream time, which is very beautifully expressed using dots and patterns. The dreaming is used to represent Aboriginal concepts of every when, during which the land was inhabited by ancestral figures, often of heroic proportions or with supernatural abilities. These figures were often distinct from gods, as they did not control the material world and were not worshipped but only revered. The concept of the dream time has subsequently become widely adopted beyond its original Australian context, and it's now part of global popular culture. So the idea of dream time and the dreaming refers to the Aboriginal understanding of their ancestors, and each individual Aboriginal person, as I understand it, owns a part of their landscape, or is connected to, not owns, a part of their landscape, and they're responsible for it. So each individual might be responsible a particular stream and the animals associated with that stream, and they have their dreaming and their landscape which they are responsible for and which they're connected to and which they are very much part of before they're born and after they die. A dreaming is often associated with a particular place and may also belong to specific ages, gender, or skin groups. Dreamings may be represented in artworks. For example, there's one called The Dreaming by Pikili in the Northern Territory. And, sorry, this is all getting a bit complicated. The dreaming refers to a system of totemic symbols, so that an Aboriginal person may own a specific dreaming, so to speak, such as kangaroo dreaming, shark dreaming, honey ant dreaming, badger dreaming, or any combination of dreamings pertinent to their country. And I obviously don't understand it in depth, but I do think there's this ability of the Aborigines to be doing two things at once, to be living their life and to be living a past life and maybe a future life. And they do seem to have a very different world understanding to our own, which I wish we understood more of. So that's very much just scratching the surface of that whole concept. But thank you very much for joining me this evening to think about creation myths. I'm holding the world in my hands, which is about to be created, perhaps by a raven, perhaps by a giant octopus bearing flames. Um, do let me know if you have any thoughts on creation myths or any particular ones that you wish I'd mentioned. And I might see you next week, but I might not, because I'm actually going to be in Saudi Arabia at a book fair next week. I will try and see if I can do a live session from there, but I don't know how easy that will be. So if I can, I'll be there. Look out for me. Otherwise, I'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Uh, Thanks so much for coming this evening, and see you soon.